Hey guys, hi, it's Bev. Listen, last time we spoke, my last video was all about how I got to give a TEDx talk, but this time, this video is my top 10 tips for giving the best talk you can. Now, whether that's a TEDx talk or just talking in public in general, as maybe a keynote, anything that you might need to do to stand up in front of a group of people and talk, I'm going to share my top 10 tips for what I've learned, not only from doing a TEDx, but from many years of standing on stage and talking to people. And hang around, because I've got one thing that you absolutely don't want to do when you're giving a talk. The first tip for giving a talk, not a training, but a talk, is to have a story. And even if you're training, still have a story. They say facts tell, stories sell. Now, of course, with a TEDx talk, you are not selling a product or a service, but you are selling your idea. And if you want your idea to stick, if you want your idea to be memorable, if you want your idea to be interesting, use stories. Stories about maybe other people, although you do have to be careful, you need to get their permission if you're talking about them overtly, or stories about yourself, or parables or anecdotes. They all help to get your message across. Okay, tip number 2, engage the audience early, whether that's with a question, with a joke. If you're a funny person, a joke is brilliant. If you're not a naturally funny person, you might want to be careful with jokes. They can fall really flat if you're not careful. But engage with something, a visual aid of some sort, a question, an activity. Get people standing if necessary. I've done this before, especially if I'm ever doing the graveyard shift just after lunchtime when everybody's a little bit sluggish after their meal. They're a little bit sleepy. Quite often I get people standing up and doing something, maybe a little bit quirky. I didn't do that in my TEDx, but you could do something that engages the audience early on. In fact, you should do something that engages the audience early on. First of all, it's a good icebreaker, and it also gets them in the frame of mind to listen to you. Okay, my tip number 3 is to switch up the pace and the tone throughout the whole talk. So you might want to move between being quite fast-paced, especially if you've got a point that you really want to make. You might want to build the pace up towards the climax of that point and slow it down to deliver that point, and change the tone, change the volume in your voice, change between quiet, thoughtful, reflective, right through to really pacey, fast, loud. Get your point across. We want to be engaged as a listener, and that means we don't want a monotone, boring conversation that all sounds just a little bit the same without any inflection or tone. Tip number 4, be very careful with slides. If you're using a presentation of some sort, if you're using slides, make sure that they're a visual aid and not a distraction. You don't want your slides to detract from what you're actually talking about. Visuals work really, really well. So they say a picture paints 1,000 words. So if you can use really good graphics or photographs or visuals in your slides, that is so much better than having text on your slides, and absolutely not text that you are saying. So don't just put your script up on a slide. Now, I did do this with one element of my TEDx talk. It was a verbatim quote that I was using that somebody else had said, and to emphasize the quote, I had it on a slide. I also had it up there so that I could read the monitor in front of me, and that meant that I was absolutely certain I wasn't going to misquote that person. But otherwise, try and avoid having lots of text on a slide, and especially not the text that you're speaking. We want people to be listening to you and engaged with you, and the visuals enhance what you're saying. They don't detract from it. My 5th tip is to slow down. Now, obviously, I've already spoken about varying the pace. Maybe you want to pick the pace up at times, maybe you want to slow it down. But in general, when we're nervous, we talk faster. And if you've got a really brilliant message that you're trying to get across, don't lose that opportunity, because you're talking so quick that nobody can actually hear what you're talking about. Especially if you're using really complicated words that maybe people don't recognize ordinarily, it's very difficult. And it may feel like as you're talking, it may feel like you're unnaturally slow. I mean, we don't want to be Margaret Thatcher slow, but you do want to try and ensure that the audience has time to process what you're saying. So keeping it slow, keeping it easy to listen to, using pauses is great. So if you've given something that's a little bit complex, if you shared something that's a little bit scientific or detailed, or words that people won't understand straight away, just give a pause and give them a chance to really digest and take in what you've said. Okay, my tip number 6 is a strange one. If you are doing a TEDx talk, I would absolutely advise you have a script. Now, I know some people don't, and I don't normally work from a script. If I'm doing any kind of public speaking, I don't normally have a script. I have a few pointers that I might know I want to cover, but I know my subject well, and I don't normally have a script. But I did for my TEDx, and the reason being, you are on a very tight time frame. We had 15 minutes. The TED maximum for the guidelines from TED is 18 minutes. So TEDx's, which are independently organized local TEDx events, so they're the style of TED, but they're independently run. Just throw that one in there. You are on such a strict time limit. You want to make sure that every single sentence counts and that you don't spend a lot of time umming and ahhing and repeating yourself and forgetting bits. So I absolutely would advise you to script it. Script it and learn it. The way I did it, I had my 15-minute talk, and I knew that my brain could pretty much remember about 5 minutes worth of script. I broke my script down into 3 chunks, and I numbered them 1, 2, 3, and I learned them in isolation. I memorized each chunk in isolation, which meant if I got to the end of 5 minutes and I couldn't quite remember what came next, I was able to say, okay, I've done 1, I just now need to do number 2, and I could recall number 2 because I'd learned it as a separate chunk, a little bit like learning the little chunks of a telephone number. I don't know if you do this. I break telephone numbers down into manageable chunks, and I did that with my TED talk. Now, I could do it on my TEDx talk, I beg your pardon. I did that 3 5-minute chunks, but actually if you find that you can only remember 2 or 3 minutes at a time, have 5 or 6 different chunks and memorize them as separate little pieces that you can put together in order, and you'll know that you're in the right order if you've remembered that that particular section is number 3 or that particular section is number 4, etc. Tip number 7. This is an obvious one, but so often we don't do it. Tip number 7 is rehearse, practice, 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 and practice again and again and again. Practice until you absolutely are so bored with the sound of your own voice, you wouldn't care if you never heard your talk again. Don't worry, keep going. If you get to the point where you are really bored with your talk, chances are you're putting the work in to be able to really, really memorize it. The more you feel 100% comfortable, or as close to 100% comfortable as you can be, that your talk is in here and that it's as natural as jumping in the car and driving. It's as natural as getting up in the morning and knowing how to brush your teeth. When you get to the point where your talk is that embedded in your subconscious mind, you will feel absolutely confident when you step out onto the stage that you will remember it. Because remember, as nerves kick in, the conscious brain doesn't always want to work as well as it should. But if you've already done the work to get it really embedded in your subconscious brain, you will know that you will be fine. So the way I practiced, I used the voice recorder on my phone and I recorded the speech as I read it through with the script in front of me. So I knew that I was getting it exactly as I wanted it. Then I would listen to it in the early stages. I would listen to it in the car. I would listen to it when I went out for walks. I would listen to it when I was walking around the shops. I'd just stick some earbuds in and I would have it going in my ears all of the time. But that wasn't enough. Just listening back to it wasn't enough. What I then started doing was talking to myself. I do that too much anyway. Anyway, I started talking into the bathroom mirror. I would talk into my dressing table mirror when I was getting ready. If I was stopped at traffic lights, I'd talk into the windscreen. Anywhere I could talk my talk, I would. because I just wanted to make sure that I was remembering it. And I'd continue to do voice recordings without the script, and then I'd go back and listen back with the script in front of me to see which bits I'd missed. I also quite often videoed myself so that I could also get an idea of my body language, my hand gestures, any little mannerisms that I have. Mannerisms aren't a problem as long as they're not distracting. So you may have mannerisms that you don't even know you have, and you won't know until you see yourself recorded. Your coaches, if you're doing a TEDx talk, if you have access to coaching, they will help you to understand what your mannerisms are and if they're distracting or not. But you can certainly do that by just videoing yourself as you go. Cup of tea, hang on. Okay, tip number 8. Think about your body language. Now, this is really important. When you're on stage, you need to be bigger than you think you do. Your movements need to feel more exaggerated. And also be very careful thinking about how you stand. Certainly women in particular have a tendency to move from hip to hip. Hold on, I'm going to show you how this works. 1 second. Okay, lighting is awful, but bear with me here. So what a lot of people do is they'll stand with their hips sort of like this, or stand moving from hip to hip when they're talking. They'll often do this, which isn't great if you're a woman. So just be careful of your mannerisms. What we really want to be doing is, let me just take you a little bit further away here so you can see my whole body. So you want to be standing with your weight over both feet. So you're fairly well balanced, not moving from hip to hip, not standing, just moving around. It looks really nervous if you're moving from one foot to the other. Now, you might do that naturally and not realize you do it. It's quite a normal way to stand. It looks too casual and it looks a little bit nervy. You look small when you stand on one leg, with your weight on one leg. So stand with your legs about hip width distance apart. You're balanced, you're stable over both hips, both feet in line. And you can talk to your audience from here. You can use hand gestures to emphasize what you're doing. You'll probably have a clicker for your presentation. I find that that's really useful. I found that to keep my hands still so I wasn't overly gesticulating, and have my hands around about here. And then I would just use them occasionally to emphasize a point. You just need to be a little bit careful that you're not sort of moving around all over the place. Now, when I teach, I do tend to walk around quite a bit. But as we're talking about TEDx, you do have a red dot, and you really want to stay on that red dot. For a start, you've got a film crew who are trying to film you, and they want it to look the best it can when it goes live onto the TEDx website. So if you're constantly walking around the stage and walking in and out of frame, that's going to be really difficult for the film crew. It also can be a little bit distracting for the audience as well. So try and stay steady over your feet. Try and keep your hips fairly stable. Try and limit hand movements so that they just emphasize what you're talking about, but you're not helicoptering all over the place. And I think there's a balance. Some people are too rigid. You don't want to be stood like this giving your talk either, but relaxed, shoulders back, weight even, minimal hand movements. You think about your hand movements carefully. Think how they would potentially enhance what you're talking about and not distract. Okay, and my apologies for the poor lighting. Better on another day. I really just wanted to get this done, so hopefully you could see what I was doing and it was quite clear. Tip number 9, think about what you're going to wear. Choose your clothing carefully. Now, for TEDx, they actually like you to be, just get my tea. They actually quite like you to be relaxed. They don't want you suited and booted. They don't want you in a shirt and tie if you're a man. And I think if for women, there's a tendency to get really dressed up. You want to impress, but you have to also think about A, comfort, B, practicality. You don't want to be fidgeting with the clothes that you're wearing. Now, I had to come down a flight of stairs at the side of the stage to get down onto the main stage. The idea of wearing heels and then tripping up as I was coming down those stairs was enough to stop me in my tracks. I was just in jeans. I had a navy blue camisole top, and then I had a white sort of kimono style jacket over the top. I avoided patterns. You can wear pattern, but you just have to be really careful, especially with small patterns, because they can make the video go a little bit wonky. You don't want your audience feeling sick as they're kind of watching your psychedelic shirt, making them go all a little bit woozy. So just think about your clothing. It needs to be comfortable, it needs to be practical, and you definitely want to avoid, if it's a TEDx talk, you want to avoid wearing black or red, because the stage will be black with highlights of red, and you're likely to fade into the background, and you don't want to fade, you want to stand out, which is why I went for dark clothes for my main frame, and then a white jacket which sort of stood out against the black background. So think about your clothing. The other thing I would say, this is probably for men and women, but more so, I guess, for women because we're more used to wearing it. I did a little bit of research about stage makeup and what was best to do to make sure that your face didn't get obscured by the lighting. There's a lot of quite harsh lighting on the stage, and the tips that I found were go a couple of shades darker with your foundation, but make sure that it's blended into your neck. Make sure that your makeup is probably just a bit more exaggerated, I guess, than you would normally wear day to day. And tip number 10 is all about use the coaching that is offered. Now, if it's a TEDx talk, I'm assuming it's the same for all TEDx franchises. I may be wrong. Certainly with ours, we got amazing coaching, and use it. Use it to the full. Those coaches know their stuff, and even though I talk for a living, I'm a trainer and I talk for a living, I still learned loads. And be prepared to be open to the feedback. The coaches and your fellow speakers only have one objective, and that is to make you the best you can be when you get on that stage. So any feedback that you get, take it, use it, implement it, absorb it, and try and make sure that you bring it into your talk. They won't give you any feedback just for the sake of being negative. When I did my very first rehearsal, I actually was told it was really good, and I didn't get any real constructive negative comments. And I actually left thinking, I kind of wish I had. I kind of wish they'd told me something I could work on. Because we're never brilliant, we're never perfect, there's always room for improvement. Actually, the future weeks, it was great because they did give me genuinely good feedback that did help me to improve. And you have to be willing to take that and not be upset or offended, because they're not telling you anything to make you feel bad. They're doing everything to make you better. So use that feedback. The other thing I would say is get to know the rest of the speakers, build relationships with the people that you're on stage with, and the crew and the organisers, whatever the event is. Okay, final tip, and this is a what not to do as opposed to a what to do. My number 11 tip of what not to do when it comes to being on stage, giving a talk, is to feel like you have an entitlement to be there. You don't have a right to have people listen to what you say. It's an absolute privilege. And whether it's a TEDx talk, or you've been invited to give a keynote, or whether you're speaking at your local women's institute, it doesn't matter. You do not have a right to be there. Now, I'm going to caveat that with, I'm not suggesting you always talk for free. Your knowledge, your expertise, your wisdom, you've earned that. So, of course, there are going to be times when you should be paid for what you do. And I have quite clear criteria now on what I will do for free and what I won't. I might do another video about that, actually, my 3 criteria for when I will offer my speaking services for free. And what that means is there's a few things that I think are really important. First of all, regardless of whether it's TEDx or a keynote, stick to your time. If you've been given 15 minutes, stick to no more than 15 minutes. If you've been given an hour, stick to no more than an hour. It's very disrespectful to go over time. There may be another speaker after you and you're eating into their time slot. So be respectful of other people's time and stick to the time slot that you have been given. The other thing I would say is make sure that if there are rehearsals, that you turn up and do the work. You know, especially with a TEDx, the coaches and the organizers are giving up their time for free so that you can stand on that stage and give your best self. So give them the courtesy of turning up for those rehearsals and turning up prepared. So if you know that you're going to have to give the first 5 minutes or a 5-minute chunk of your talk, prepare it, rehearse it, have it ready. You may need to take your notes in the early days. Have your notes. Turn up on time. Be respectful of the people who are there waiting. That's my absolute sort of number 11 top tip of what not to do. Do not think you are entitled to be there. Be respectful and put the work in. Guys, if you've enjoyed this, go and check out my previous video, how I got to do a TEDx talk. Hit the subscribe button and hit the bell and you'll get notified when future videos come out. So stick around, hit the subscribe, and I will talk to you very soon.